I just personally witnessed how difficult and expensive it was for people to connect and stay connected with their loved ones on the outside. And I just observed how people who did not stay in touch with their loved ones were the people that I would see come back. So they would get the release date will come up, they'll be gone for a few months, and then they'll pop back in. 40 years of research that showed that one of the most predictive things of recidivism is is both education and communication with your loved ones and supporting them from outside. If you lose touch with all that, the likeliness of you reoffending is extremely high. When I saw that, I said, you know what, I'm gonna make it easy. And then also have my own pain, just reaching out and talking to family and friends and saying, hey, send me some pictures. I wanna know about, what happened last week or from the holidays or whatever. So I saw this as, well, why don't we create a way for people to easily do these things from their phone? And then we do all the hard stuff that they don't want to do, like dealing with the packaging and shipping and rules at the institutions and all that kind of stuff. When I was released, I thought about, okay, I need to do something. I can't rely on someone to give me a job or create me an opportunity. I have to create my own. I said, okay, I'm going to pick out of all these ideas that I have, I'm going to pick the one that feels most authentic and that I understand the most. And that was it. And that's where it started.
What's up, everybody? This is Simon. On this episode of The Ideal Hour, I have Frederick Hutson. He has a really interesting story to tell. Frederick spent, I think, 4 or 5 years in prison on drug trafficking. Now, it was marijuana, I should point out. But during that time, he created business plans and has created a very interesting company that allows for inmates to communicate much cheaper than they would if they were using the penitentiary or the prison system for communication. The company is called Pigeonly, and it's a multi-million-dollar business now. So Frederick has a story to tell. Frederick, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you were in the Air Force. You got out of the Air Force. What was it like? Could you not find a job? How did you get in trouble in your early life? Like, what led you? Because obviously, drug dealers are also entrepreneurs, just not in the right direction, in my opinion. So tell me a little bit about your life, and then how did you start Pigeonly? Because that's so incredible what you've been able to achieve, like a complete 180.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town outside of Tampa called St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where my mother was originally from. And growing up in St. Pete, that was the culture there. Everyone sold drugs. That was really, just the culture that I grew up in and what was always around me. But for the most part, during, my adolescence and high school, I managed to stay out of trouble the entire time. And one of the probably arguably the most successful people in my family was my uncle, and he was in the Air Force. So he's the one that planted the seed in my mind to join the Air Force, which I did. Ultimately becoming a electrician on the F-16 aircraft. And so that was an interesting, journey and process. Obviously in the military, you meet a lot of different people, instills, a lot of things in you, discipline being one of them. But I still had those close family ties and relationships, and friends and family that came from a very drastically different background and culture. So fast forward to in the military, I was still extremely entrepreneurial as I was, in my high school years, always doing little odd jobs here and there, whether it be window washing or cutting the grass and things like that to make money. So, going into the Air Force, that was something that I wanted to continue. And I bought started a window tinting shop. My first duty station was in Las Vegas, Nevada. So it had brought me across the country from Florida to Nevada. And I saw that there was a storefront that was used for window tinting that had been shut down. So, I went negotiated with the landlord, reopened it, didn't know anything about window tinting. And ultimately, went right into a Vegas summer, which anyone who's visited Vegas in the summertime knows how extremely hot it gets.
Oh, yeah.
And, cars started pulling up. And, I went to shops neighboring me and said, hey, I need to find some window tinters now because I have a window tinting shop and I don't know what I'm doing. I just offered the window tinters in other shops higher salaries and higher rates, and ended up poaching, people to come work in my shop. And, one thing led to another and, started making some money. And while this was going on simultaneously, my close friend of mine had visited Vegas, who I grew up with in Florida. And I was like, what are you doing in Florida? He's like, oh, I come here all the time. I said, I'm sorry, what are you doing in Vegas? He's like, oh, no, I come to Vegas all the time. And I said, well, doing what? And my interests and antennas went up. And he's like, well, I basically get weed from Nogales, Mexico. They drive it to me here in Vegas. And then from Vegas, I either fly back home with it in my carry-on or I mail it. And I was like, mail? I said, what? I said, there's probably a way more better and efficient way to do this. Mind you, I had just got an honorable discharge out the military, just had started the window tinting shop. And I'm already thinking about the next big venture, right?
Entrepreneur's mind, that's why.
Thinking about, how I can make his operation a lot more efficient so he's not flying back and forth trying to take weed back in his carry-on. So, this is post 9/11, so flying with weed in your carry-on is insane anyway, just on its face, but that's what he was doing. So yeah, I said, we can make this a lot more efficient. So went into, something that I now always remind myself, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should. I built a logistics system basically to move marijuana directly from Tucson, Arizona through Vegas, and from Vegas to, St. Petersburg, Tampa, Sarasota, et cetera, and all up and down South Florida. And basically did this through using the shipping system. So use UPS, DHL, FedEx, and my 19-year-old mind then thought I was being smart by avoiding the Postal Service because I thought that would make it a federal crime. Completely skipped over the fact that the minute I crossed state lines was a federal crime anyway.
Yep.
This actually worked really well. I ended up buying multiple shipping centers because the volume increased so quickly, so fast that, I wasn't able just to go to these UPS stores and continue going. I had went to every single UPS store in the city, and I wasn't able to continue going to these stores with these shipments without looking suspicious.
Yeah.
So ultimately I said, well, you know what, I'm going to invest in my own. And I started my own shipping center, which had all the various carriers. And that allowed basically the volume to triple what it was before. So, taking a step back, starting from the point of looking at, his process and seeing how efficient it was, and then coming up with a way to make it more efficient, that really, led me down this path. That went on for about 5 years. And then out the blue, I learned how federal indictments worked. I was indicted when I was 23 years old.
Wow.
But, even then I was still naive to the process because I thought, hey, after being exposed to something for so long, you get desensitized to it. Mm-hmm. So I was around marijuana so much that I forgot it was legal. Like I completely forgot. This is not legal. So, and this was long before the legalization you have now. I live in Las Vegas now, and it's very legal here. You can go to the store and buy it like 7-Eleven, like a popsicle. So it's a non-issue. But back then it was extremely legal.
They weren't receptive to it back then. California's legal, but shipping it across state lines, that was the big problem.
Exactly. That was the big no-no, right? Yeah. So it's one thing to, keep it in the state. There's another thing to move it across multiple states, and then even made it worse, smuggling it out of Mexico. So, it started with getting it from Arizona, then the volume increased so much and that didn't work enough. Then I needed to get it directly from Mexico. So end up having an operation that crossed 2 countries and multiple states. And 22 years old at the time, right?
How much were you moving, man?
My indictment was for 2,000 kilograms, which is a little over 3,000 pounds. Oh, wow. And that's on average, I would say a day we were doing maybe a couple 100 pounds a day or something like that.
Wow.
Back and forth. So this went on for a while. And when I was indicted, I quickly learned how the federal government worked. I quickly learned that you don't have to get caught with something in your hand. That, I learned what conspiracy was. I learned what RICO charges was. I learned all these words that start with acronyms that are very scary, right? So, but yeah, so then, going through that process, I quickly learned that even though I was desensitized to it, and even though most people, even back then, were like, it's not a big deal. At that volume, the federal government sees it an extremely big deal. And at that amount, it was a big deal, right? So, go through the whole process. I plead out to my case because there was no way out of it at that point. Asked people.
Were you thinking to go into trial at first, or? I
considered it. The arrogance in me considered it because, again, the naivete of just not knowing how the system works. And then no, I never got caught with drugs on me. One time on the airport, I had to stop with like 50,000 cash on me, but that was the most. But cash is not illegal. It's highly suspicious, but not illegal.
Yeah.
I quickly learned in advice of, the people around me, particularly the attorneys, like, well, you don't want to do this because you're going to lose. Yeah. So I pled out, and the judge, because I had never been in trouble before and because I had honorable discharge, she gave me 5 years, right? So it could have been a lot more. So the way the federal system works is that based off of your criminal history and your amount of times you've been interacted with the criminal justice system, they have like a point scale. Mm-hmm. So it's either the higher you are on the point scale with the more interactions you've had with law enforcement, and the lower. So I was on the very low end, which is to my benefit, which helped me out a lot. So then I was sentenced. So then I was introduced to the world of federal prison at 23 years old. Didn't really know what to expect, had no idea. Because of my young age and because of the amount of drugs on my indictment, it automatically put me at a high security risk, which means I had to start at the higher institutions, which are the USPs. And then as my time progressed, they brought me lower and lower until I eventually made it down to a camp. The camp, the drastic difference between USP and a camp is the USP, you have these huge, scary brick walls with gun turrets at the top. And then in the camps, you don't have walls at all, right? So you're usually on a military base, and the camp is there to support the maintenance and different things that happen on the military base. So there's no fences, there's nothing. There's nothing stopping you from walking off. But the idea is that you're so close to going home at this point. Yeah, you don't want to.
You're there to roam. You're not a violent threat, and so forth.
Exactly. So I went through the whole process. So I got my tour through the federal system. I even got to ride on Con Air. Quick sidebar. It is a real thing. They have a plane that travels.
That was a good movie.
and it's like a decent Southwest jet. And it does travel from place to place and move prisoners from place to place. And it's not comfortable. You don't get any peanuts, anything like that. No drinks or anything like that. But that is a real.
At this point, well, first question that comes up, when you realize you're getting sentenced 5 years, you mentioned earlier that you were like, well, weed's not that bad. And I in high school, I grew up, a lot of people smoke weed around me. I didn't personally do it, but because I was always afraid I have this addiction thing. But
right.
It's not a big deal, I would think. Maybe at that volume, it becomes like, whoa, oh my God. But when you found out you're going to prison for 5 years, were you like, this is not a big deal? Did it hit you hard? Was there I'm sure you shed some tears. Like what? I'm sure they seized your money. What happened?
Yeah. So during that process, going through the federal system, just the trial part, the criminal justice system, we're not even in prison yet, but just going through that criminal justice system, the first thing that they do is once you're indicted, I was indicted and arrested, even though my case was out of Florida, because that's where all the drugs were landing. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. So they had the people that came to arrest me was ICE, Immigration and Customs Control Enforcement, which was because we were literally getting shit from over in Mexico. Then we had the DEA, obviously, and then you had the Tampa Police Department, right? So those are the three agencies that was involved just in my case.
Wow.
So when you have, so at that time, when you see that, number one, anyone who sees the windbreakers with the acronyms on the back, at this point, you're way over your head, right? So it's just way over your head when you see that. So, that's not, you quickly realize this is not the kind of thing you can talk yourself out of. It's not like getting a ticket, right? So I think for me, when the judge gave me the sentence, I couldn't in my mind fathom, what does it look like for 5 years? 5 years felt almost like 100 years, right? Because even when you look at people today and they, you ask them the simple question, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? People really pause and take a deep breath because they actually have no idea what their life is going to look like in 5 years, right? So, and I think even when you're younger, it's harder to see. I'm older now, I'm 40 now, but then when you're 20 years old, to think about 5 years in the future, for most 20-year-olds, we're not thinking that far ahead, right? We're not thinking what our life is like. We're not even thinking about the time that you missed in 5 years and all the growth and the maturity and experiences that you would have in 5 years. Majority of my 20s, I was in jail. So, those were like some of those years that you would have a lot of the experiences that kind of shape who you are, that you don't even know that you're going to miss that, right? At the time, right? You're so young. So that was, for me, it didn't really click until, that first week that I was in, that after I was sentenced, and then after, they took me to the back and, now you're like, okay, this is real. You're not leaving. And then you think like 5 years, like 2000, you start doing the math, like 2011, 2012, and it's 2007. And you're like, that just sounds, it just sounds so far. So, that, and then I think what I learned during that time is really just how to use my time and how to, time, it sounds strange, but time is very, is really based on perception, right? So you probably notice it with small things, like some things, you drive somewhere and it seems like it takes you forever to get there, and you drive the same distance back, seems like you got back faster, right? And it's just, only thing that's, the distance hasn't changed, it's your perception of the time passing has changed, right? And in prison it's no different, right? So the more active you are and the more you focus on, keeping yourself busy, particularly doing positive things, like whether, for me, I read a lot of business books, I've read a lot of business magazines, I spent my time imagining and thinking about what I want to do as far as business-wise, creating different ideas and business plans, even if it was just for the exercise alone. And it made the perception of time go by a lot faster for me because I did it that way, even though it was the same amount of time. And then also the result of that was I was just prepared as I could be for the day that I did get released. So that's what I learned, about how subjective time can be and how different it can be from person to person and how you use it. But for me, that's how I spent some of my time. So I got in the best shape of my life. I spent, a significant amount of my time really just diving into anything business that I can get my hands on, whether it be the Wall Street Journal that was, 2 weeks old, or if it was magazines. And, I really just taught myself to really focus in and use my imagination to fill in the gaps for what information I did not have. And I wrote a number of business plans, and the one that I chose to run with when I was released was Pigeonly.
That's amazing. What an incredible story. It's like, it's almost if you didn't go to prison, this wouldn't happen, but this is such a different
exactly.
path. So it was kind of a reward in disguise, so to speak. Right. So Pigeonly, why Pigeonly? I mean, this company is funded. You've got investors. You're still in Las Vegas. Some investors I read online, according to our research, Joe Montana, Eric Moore, Tim Draper, Mitch Caper, and so forth. And I hope they're all accurate, but the company has...
Yes, all accurate. All accurate.
Yeah. Excellent. That's incredible. Joe Montana, by the way, one of the best quarterbacks out there. Just throwing it out there. What was the issue communicating? You obviously are solving a problem, which is what they tell in Entrepreneur 101 school. What was the issue that you felt you could solve that the prison system put on you and other prisoners out there that you said, hey, when I get out, this is the business plan that's really going to work?
Yeah, no, I get it. So really for me was, while I was there, I just personally witnessed how difficult and expensive it was for people to connect and stay connected with their loved ones on the outside. And I just observed how people who did not stay in touch with their loved ones were the people that I would see come back. So they would get the release date will come up. They'll be gone for a few months, and then they'll pop back in, right? Mm-hmm. And when I started seeing that, I didn't know that my general observation from just being there was backed by over like 40 years of research that showed that one of the most predictive things of recidivism is is both education and communication with your loved ones and support network on outside. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, it makes sense, because if you're gone for a very long time, being able to have those real strong relationship with whoever is going to be your support network when you're released, the people who are going to care the most about you, that's really important to help you get your driver's license, help you get your first job, have the couch to sleep on till you get on your feet. Just those types of things are extremely important. So if you lose touch with all that, the likeliness of you reoffending is extremely high. Mm-hmm. So when I saw that, I said, you know what, I'm going to make it easy. And then also I had my own pain, just reaching out and talking to family and friends and saying, hey, send me some pictures. I want to know about, what happened last week or from the holidays or whatever. And it was just always difficult and time consuming for people to go to the post office, buy a stamp. Like, when's the last time you bought a stamp, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was just really hard for folks, particularly at this was right when the iPhone was taking off. This is right when we was going to the mobile phone revolution. And the world was changing extremely fast. So I saw this as, well, why don't we create a way for people to easily do these things from their phone? And then we do all the hard stuff that they don't want to do, like dealing with the packaging and shipping and rules at institutions and all that kind of stuff. It was a very, very, very simple concept and idea. And so when I was released, and I thought about, okay, I need to do something. I can't rely on someone to give me a job or create me an opportunity. I have to create my own. I said, okay, I'm going to pick out of all these ideas that I have, I'm going to pick the one that feels most authentic and that I understand the most. And that was it. And that's where it started. So,
did you need at the time, approval from the I would imagine you needed some type of approval from the prison system, or how does that work? No, really.
What's interesting is that the way we built the company was that the company only facilitated what the consumer wanted. So the company just facilitated you wanting to send photos. The photos would go through the mail to the facility as they normally would, as if you went to the post office and sent it yourself.
Wow.
So it didn't require us to have any relationship with the facility whatsoever. However, the facilities were liking it because they knew it. All the photos that came from us didn't have any contraband on it, or any contraband inside of it, right? So it became a thing where they didn't have to co-sign us, but it was one of the things where we had the silent nod. That's okay, yeah, we're okay with this because the things we get from Pigeonly we know are going to be appropriate. We know we're going to be within our rules and guidelines and so on and so forth.
Is it available in all levels of prisons, or is it more on the less security type prison?
No, it's available across the board. Okay. Any facility that accepts mail and has a phone system, Pigeonly is currently in operation.
That's incredible. I mean, you're enabling people not only to have a better chance, as you mentioned, to get out and reacclimate into society, but also communicate and get by with time being moved faster by communicating with their family. What a crazy idea, but what an incredible idea. How was it? Was it hard to come out with a felony conviction, which a federal felony obviously is a lifelong conviction? You'll always have that on your name unless someone drops it or you petition to drop it. It's not like a state felony where, you know, after a certain amount of years of good conduct, it just drops off, becomes a misdemeanor, and then you could clean it. How was it coming out of the prison system and knowing that you're a convicted felon, or was it hard to pitch people like Joe Montana or any of these other individuals saying, hey, I have this solution? Were you worried that this would be a negative stigma on your name or your family name?
Yeah, it was, you know, well, let me start from the beginning. It's hard building a business and raising money for any business, no matter who you are. That's just the nature, that's the industry. The tech world is extremely competitive, and you really, it's really a long, difficult road going through that process. It's harder coming out of jail. It's harder when you don't come from that background. You don't know the industry. You don't have those relationships. That makes it even harder. What I learned was that during that time, I had to know and understand my business extremely well. And once I knew what my cost of acquisition was, once I knew what, you know, my growth rates was, once I knew all those things and I could say those things cold, it communicated to the people like Joe Montana or Mitch Kapor and those that I understood my business, and it made them decide that I was an entrepreneur that they wanted to bet on. Because in the early stages when you're starting a business, the early investors is not so much betting on your business. They're more so betting on the founder, right? They're betting that the founder is going to figure out a path to success because they understand and they're seasoned enough to know that your business idea and model is going to change 100 times before you get it right. And it's less about the business idea and more about the person behind it. So I had to own my story, and I had to own my story in a way that, hey, this is why I understand that this problem exists. And this is why I'm qualified to solve it, because this is my story. And once I got comfortable with that, it really changed my psyche in a way and my level of comfort in discussing and talking about what I was doing. Because at first, yes, I was definitely, for lack of a better word,
probably a little bit of doubt,
or just not knowing like how I was going to be judged or viewed. And once I owned it, because, you know, another thing that's important just in business in general, like you have to just own your story. Because if you don't own your story, whatever that story may be, somebody else is going to tell your story for you, right? So it's much better for you to own it and tell the story the way you want to tell it, and then, you know, and own it that way. And that's what's worked well.
Wow, wonderful. To your point, guys, whoever's listening out there, own the story or own your narrative and make it work for you in the positive. I think a lot of people respect this complete turnaround, and then they also understand you've been in the trenches with the solution that can really resolve a problem versus just coming in and saying, hey, I got an idea for prisoners to communicate, but never really experiencing the other side of it, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So you guys use VoIP, voice over IP, and is it an app in the system that they download to devices, or do you provide them devices?
Yeah, so the way our system works is that, let's say mom wants to communicate with her son. What she'll do is create a Pigeonly account. Our system will automatically search and find where her son is located, which helps mom a lot because a lot of times mom might know that her son's in California DOC, but there's 34 facilities within California DOC. She may not know which one, and people move from place to place. So our system does all the hard work for mom in finding out where her son is. And then basically she can just add her son to her contact list. And then once she's on that dashboard, she has a number of options. She can just hit the button, send photos, upload photos, and hit the send button. It'll go to our fulfillment center that will then print those photos out and mail it. And then her son will receive those photos in the mail as normal mail. Or she can request a telephone number. When she requests a telephone number, all that does is provide mom with a number that she can be reached on by her son. That will always route the call the cheapest way possible. So in some places, calls can be as high as $15 for 15 minutes.
Wow.
The cheapest that the calls can be is 90 cents, for example, for the same 15 minutes. So what we do is that we're going to give mom a number that's routing the call the right way so that her call is always going to be on the 90-cent side and never on the $15 side. And what that means, to not get too technical, is prisons operate on prison phone providers, I should say, not really the prisons. The prison phone providers operate on a very archaic phone system, like what we don't think about today because we all use cell phones. They operated on the same system of rate centers. And basically, back in the old days, where your phone number came from, depending on the rate center that call came from, determined what you were billed per minute. Obviously today, we don't care about area codes and rate centers anymore because I can call anywhere in the United States, it's all the same cost. But the old, AT&T days,
I remember.
depending on the area code and the prefix, the next 3 digits after the area code, that determined the rate. So you can literally be calling across the street from where the prison is located, and that can be considered a long distance call. The only calls that were considered local are calls that originate and terminate within the same rate center. So once we figured that out, we said, okay, well, we're just going to generate telephone numbers for our customers, for their loved ones in the same rate center, wherever that institution is located, which guarantees that every single call that inmate makes when he calls home, when he calls that number, is always going to be a local call. So that's basically how the phone system works.
Incredible technology. All right, let's talk a little bit about, for the entrepreneurs out there that are struggling. You mentioned earlier, it's hard to get funding. Even if you're not an ex-convict or just anybody coming into asking people for money and asking someone to believe in you and giving you money to invest in your company. What are some of the advice pieces you can throw out there to struggling entrepreneurs, not only from the investment side, but even just on a day-to-day to keep going? What kept you motivated? I don't know if with Pigeonly, you hit it right on the nail your first time out. It seems like you were an entrepreneur your whole life. But what can you share?
Yeah, I think you start with an idea and start with something that feels authentic to you. Start with something that you care about, and it's really important to work on something that you care about, because it's going to be so hard, right? And the only thing that's going to keep you in the game is the fact that you actually care about the solution that you're building, and you're really passionate about whatever problem you're trying to solve. That's what's going to keep you in the game. And that's what separates the people who are actually serious about what they're doing and the people who are just doing something because they think it's cool, right? And the people that I see that are most successful are the people who deeply care about whatever problem that they're trying to solve. So that's number one. And then number two is, don't try to get it right the first time. It's not going to be right. It's going to change. You really need to optimize to be able to get feedback from whoever your customer is as quickly as possible before you put too much resources into what you think the solution is supposed to be. And I see this mistake happen so much. I made this mistake myself. And you put so much time and resources because you thinking you understand exactly what the customer wants. And before you know it, you might be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've even seen companies be millions of dollars into building a solution that the customer doesn't even want, right? So I think it's really important to try to get your MVP, your minimum viable product, out as quickly as possible. try to take every shortcut that you can to just put it in front of customers, be able to get feedback as quickly as you can before you really double down in investment. Because particularly starting out, investors now, they're not really investing off of the idea of the napkin anymore. They want you to have a real product and real traction that you can at least prove that what you're saying is true, right? That this is a problem, people do want to pay for it, and it is and you do have a viable solution. So I think that's really the biggest piece of advice that I would give founders today. So that's the hard part. The good part is that today's extremely low cost and low barriers of entry to start a business. It's never been like this to start a business ever in the history of business. Even to the point now, there's so many solutions where even not being technical, you can actually get technical products off the ground, where before that was not possible without having a full team of engineers, right? So the world is definitely changing, and it's changing to the benefit of the entrepreneurs, where you don't necessarily have to have the hard skill sets that was necessary in the past is as early as 5-6 years ago to do it. I'll give you an example. We built our whole phone company from scratch, from the ground up. We didn't have Twilio. We didn't have the services now that you can stand up a phone company in one day, right? So, and I think as entrepreneurs really start taking advantage of things, look for the different components of what you're trying to put together, put those components together, and it's easily build your business and then prove and get validation before you want to take everything in-house. Don't be afraid to outsource things.
I think that's
even today,
outsourcing is a new way of moving business along, or even hiring extra help that before you may not be able to afford locally or could not find, not even have the time to find. I think you would agree with that.
Absolutely. Outsource is a major game changer now. Everything from Upwork to Fiverr to freelancer.com, those are game changers, because you can really outsource small components of things that you used to take a lot of time to find someone qualified to do. And you don't have to be the expert yourself. Even if it comes down to not being an expert in Excel and needing someone to help you get the formulas right, that's something you can do for $5 on Fiverr now, right? Before, you would have to hire someone and put them on salary, and it was this whole onboarding process. It's just not the same anymore. So I think that's to the founders and entrepreneurs' benefit, that the barriers to entry to business are extremely low. But the flip side of that is you really have to know the product and the problem that you're solving, because just like the barriers are low for you, the barriers are going to be low for your competitor as well, right? So you really have to understand deeply what you're going after and deeply why your solution is the right solution. And I personally would prioritize getting in front of your customer more so than the product, because there's hundreds of products there that never get traction. The people who win are the people who figure out how to get their product in front of the right customer to be able to build a viable business.
Love it. Let's talk a little bit about attracting the investor. Obviously, having a story, believing in your product, owning why you're here at the table. But what are some strategies, or even meeting that person or researching these individuals that would invest in a company? I don't know how you did it, but what are some of the strategies you would recommend to someone that may have a good idea but is looking for that financial backing, or even, oftentimes people say it's just financial backing, but those investors typically put you on the path to success. So they want their money back. So if you could share some of those, that I would appreciate it. I'm sure the audience would as well.
Sure. Number one, other entrepreneurs and other founders are your friend. Find other founders. Other founders, particularly if they raise money, they know investors, they have good relationships with investors, and other founders and entrepreneurs will always do warm intros. When someone approaches me and says, hey, this is what I'm looking at, and I understand and I get it, my mind is automatically thinking of who can I connect and introduce this person to that will be mutually beneficial for them, because I know this fits in the space of where they like to invest, and beneficial to the person that's building something, because I think they're building something credible and real and viable. So I think a lot of times people go looking for investors and they like to send cold emails to investors, and they forget that the best intro you can get to investors from another entrepreneur. It's just the way the ecosystem works, right? Because the investors are going to listen to other entrepreneurs that are credible and know the game far more than they're going to read a cold email. So number one, I would say build relationships and get warm intros to investors from other founders. That's number one. Number two, make sure that your business is ready for investment. I've seen so many times someone wants to talk to a VC, but they're not ready to talk to the VC. They might need to talk to an angel first. So just understand where you are in the life cycle of your business and match that to the right investor. Some investors invest pre-product. Some investors do seed stage. Some like to do later stage. You really have to understand all investors are not equal and they all don't invest in the same stage. So I think understanding where you are in the life cycle of your business and what investor makes sense for that is really, really important. It doesn't waste your time, doesn't waste the investor's time. And at least if you get that one opportunity to have a meeting, it can be the most beneficial use of your time and their time because you've done all the background research. And I would say number 3 is try to have traction. You don't have to have hundreds of customers. You don't have to have thousands of customers. You might have 10 customers. The point and the cool thing about traction is the entrepreneur and the founder gets to define what the hell traction is, right? So you get to say, traction for me is numbers of photos shipped. Traction for me is number of signups. Traction for me is number of minutes used on voice calls. You get to define traction, but you need to be able to define traction, and it needs to be able to pass the sniff test, and it needs to be able to prove that whatever it is that you're doing, that people are interested in it and you figured something out. A lot of times, investors don't want to fund you guessing on what's going to stick to the wall. They want to be able to fund. A lot of times you have a little inkling of something working. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be working well, but they want to fund that. They don't want to fund you trying to figure out what is going to work to start, right? So that's the hardest part. And that's the part that sucks the most because you have to bootstrap, you have to crawl and scrape it together the best way you can, but figure out some metric of traction that you can actually deliver on it, and leverage that in that first meeting that you have.
Incredible. In your first meeting with these investors, were you super nervous? How did you prep for that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're gonna be nervous. Yeah, you're gonna be real nervous. But I think what's really important for other entrepreneurs to know is that you're not asking for a handout and you're not asking for a gift, right? The investor is looking at you as a way to make money. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah,
they're not doing any charities whatsoever, right?
I love that.
So they're looking at you as a way to make money, period. So what you're actually offering them is a back seat in your car that you're building that you think is going to go XYZ place, right? And I think it's important to never forget that concept and don't let your mental shift from one thing to another where you feel like, you're asking for charity. No, it's an opportunity, and you and your investor are partners. That is the relationship. You do not work for your investors. Don't let them trick you into thinking that you work for them. You guys are partners, and you guys always need to have that partner relationship. But you are the founder. You're the one that has the vision. Listen, their kids are going to be in private school whether you succeed or fail. The reality is that you need to understand that you are putting your life and dedicating your life to something, and you want to choose your partners wisely and never feel like it's charity, right?
Yeah, or that they own you, because they expect you to work. Yes. And I've had investors come on, not investors, other entrepreneurs, and they've told me, hey, I got this money, but now I feel like I'm working more, for them. But and it happens a lot.
It's an interesting dynamic. I've been in the game 10 years now, a little over 10 years now. So it took me a while to get to where I am now. So I'm talking 10 years down the road, right? This is not how I was talking, when I started, right? And I felt exactly how you just described.
That's crazy. So what's the future for Pigeonly? What are you guys going to expand? Is it going to be strictly focused on this product? Have you started any other companies? Where are you headed, or where do you want to be headed?
We recently we're focusing more on government contracting. That's the bulk of the business now. Before we did everything was on putting her to the consumer. Now we have two sides of the company. We have the consumer side, which we described earlier. Then you have the government contracting side. The government contracting side is now institutions realize that since they trust Pigeonly to be a vendor to deliver mail without contraband, we now created a dashboard for them to view that mail in advance of its arrival so they can prove and reject it. Just basically streamlines the mailroom for them and also prevents contraband. The issue now across prisons in the United States is the increase in fentanyl coming in through the mail because fentanyl is easily incorporated in paper and or ink. And, it's a cause of a leading number of overdose and even deaths. For not just the inmate population, but also the correctional officers that have to open up and physically handle the mail. Yep. So it becomes a very dangerous situation. So we have contracts with a number of places in California. We're working on one, and we have a number of states as well. And we're expanding pretty rapidly in that area. But basically, we're just providing institutions with a safe tool to be able to receive mail that they know is 100% always contraband free without institutions getting restrictive on mail. Because what was happening is institutions would say, oh no, all these drugs come in the mail, we're going to shut mail down, we're going to be more restrictive. And again, to my earlier point, that impacts recidivism negatively because it makes it harder for people on the outside to stay connected with their loved ones. So we said, wait, there's a better solution. We can deliver you safe mail and you don't have to be restrictive. People can still stay in touch at extremely low cost, because it's hard to beat the cost of a stamp when it comes to communication. And so we're focusing a lot on that.
This thing, if it wasn't for the government hiring so many postal service employees in the country and having that workforce and that labor force, I mean, I don't see why Pigeonly or the concept of digital mail can't overtake the traditional envelope in the mailbox system where theft happens. You know, you've got fraud, you've got all these other things. I mean, I could see it in 15, 20 years from now roll out to where you get a text message and this is your email that's come in. You delete it and go on your day, and you send it by doing the same thing.
Yeah, I definitely see a world where that's happening. Postal office you're actually really on to something right now, because post office has been testing digital mail where now I get a scan of my envelope before I even get it. And I think what's going to happen is the next step further is the postal service is going to open and process mail. They're not even going to have to deliver it to you unless you actually need that delivered, right? So you'll be able to pick, what do I need physical? Everything else will be viewable online. I think you're absolutely right. I do think that's the future of what mail's going to look like.
Yeah, it's incredible. I had to buy a mailbox that had a lock on it recently because people were going through them and taking mail out. I was like, well, that wouldn't happen digitally. You can't grab some digital. No. All right. As we wrap up this podcast, I truly appreciate you coming on. First of all, it's been great. I have a fun question. You met Joe Montana in person, correct?
I have. Okay. Several times.
All right. Cool. The one time I met him was in a resort called One and Only Palmilla in Cabo. And his wife and my wife were talking, but his wife was, at that time, it was a long time ago, I'm sure she is now, she was in such shape. They started working out together, and Joe Montana is standing there, and I'm just looking at him in awe, not even listening to anything else. I was just cheesing because I've grew up kind of watching him and then Steve Young and so forth. So he's a legend. Good for you. All right. What, as we kind of wrap up here, how important is it to continue to motivate your mind and stay mentally, physically active? I mean, you did that in prison where you kept your mind constantly active to pass time, to have hope, I would say, is a big one, because you know what? You were like, hey, I'm going to put this business plan to work as soon as I get out of here. How important is that to keep going now, and what do you do to do that?
Yeah, I think at least what works for me is I'm constantly trying to, I subscribe to multiple newsletters. I'm always wanting to know interesting things that people are building and interested in how the technology world is changing, because I think, what's important for an entrepreneur is to always understand what new tools are in the toolbox. So I know the tools for the past 10 years already because I've been in the game that long. But today, a new tool is AI, right? That wasn't in the toolbox 2 years ago. Yeah. So now it's like, well, how can I leverage this new tool in everything I'm doing to make things faster, more efficient, better, and so on. So I think it's just really important, at least for me. What I like to do is I just like to keep my mind open to the new things, and not necessarily that you have to jump on every bandwagon, but just be aware of it, because you'll never, I can't count how many times I've been in the meetings with my software engineers, and we're looking for a solution. I'll be like, oh, I read this. And like, oh yeah, we can use that. And it's just like, I just think it's really important to do what you can to just make sure that information is passing you by, right? And you read interesting things. And I think now, even with our phones, it makes it a lot easier. Like the stuff you look at on Google, it's going to serve you more of it. The stuff you like on Instagram, it's going to serve you more of it. And I just think it's important just to know that, because I think as an entrepreneur, you just never know what tool you're going to need, and you never know what tool is going to be solve a problem for you, right? And to help you do something. So I just think that's important. Yeah,
to your point, always deviate just from the norm of your standard search, because they like you to keep viewing consistency. So if you're getting your news from one source, that's all you're going to get. Go out and get the news from the Wall Street Journal. All right. And final question here, Frederick. if you could go back in time, you've had quite a story. I mean, you're like one of these people. I feel like you're like a cat. If you fell, you would land on your feet no matter what you do. And I feel like you've lived many lives here. So if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, whatever it may be, what would you do? What moment in time would that be for you?
The joke would be buy Bitcoin, but I won't use that.
I wish me too, man. That's a good one.
Let me see. A piece of advice. I think the advice that I would give myself is that it's okay, Frederick. Things take longer than you think it's going to take. They're harder than you think it's going to be. And your journey doesn't have to look like everyone's journey. I think I gave myself way more stress than I needed to have on this path because I had this idea of how things should happen. And the reality is things like, especially the entrepreneurial journey, you have the ability to write that script however you want. My path, I have a lot of friends that are in the tech industry. My path, all of our paths are completely different. Mm-hmm. We all took different paths, right? And everywhere from what our capital structure looks like from investors to what our products are like and so on and so forth to what our company cultures are, everything is drastically different. And I think sometimes we unnecessarily restrict ourselves and give ourselves more stress in an already stressful journey, thinking that certain things you have to hit certain milestones when other people say you should hit these milestones. And I think people just need to definitely give themselves, at least for the sake of their own mental health, a little bit more grace.
Completely agree, man. That one hit home. It's hard to not compare. It's hard to not see your competition. It's hard to have a blueprint or a vision in your mind and know you haven't hit that at this point in time and continue going. I think to your point is give yourself time and calm yourself down because what's meant to happen will happen. And
right.
And that's excellent advice. Excellent podcast, Frederick. Thank you so much for coming on the Ideal Hour, man. I truly appreciate it. Great story. Great vibes. If I'm ever in Vegas or you're ever in the Bay,
Sure.
you have a friend out here. So, and I'm sure you are because it's tech industry here. So
yeah. I'm in the Bay a lot.
yeah. So just let me know. Thanks a lot, Frederick Hutson. There you guys have it. Pigeonly. He is from a convict to an entrepreneur to someone that has a company that has investors. Really good nuggets you've dropped on this podcast. Great inspirational story as well, man. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.